With Zionism, we want to continue to think about some of the same questions that we thought about with anti Semitism. The first being the question about what is a nation. That with Zionists, we see them thinking about really the same questions. What does it mean to be part of a nation? Is it actually impossible for Jews to be part of European nations? And are they their own nation? And so some of the types of questions that we see people asking are about whether a nation is old or new. Often to say that a nation is new is a way to basically discredit it. So there's a claim that it's old, even if we can historically see that there's really a big change in how people understand peoplehood and politics. We also see Herzl and Ahad Ha'am are just two really, they're very important figureheads for two kind of versions of Zionism. And they have very different understandings about the sources of anti-Semitism and the problem of assimilation. But those two things are basically an issue for anyone who's imagining a Jewish state or whether there should be a Jewish state. Okay, so usually when we define Zionism, the shortest definition is Jewish nationalism, and that doesn't necessarily mean a state. But Herzl definitely meant that it should include a state. And Herzl thought that having a state of Jews would basically solve all the problems that Jews were facing, that it would solve the problem of anti-Semitism because he thought the majority of Jews would want to move to the Jewish state. And then with so many Jews removed from Europe, Herzl thought then that European nations would become less anti-Semitic because he thought that basically it was only when Jews were concentrated in large numbers that any place became anti-Semitic. We can see that when he describes the nation, he says that actually it's very old. And so we don't have to take his words at face value. That certainly the idea of Jewish peoplehood is very old, and definitely we know there was an ancient Israelite kingdom. But for many, what it meant to imagine Jerusalem ceased to be about territory after the destruction of the Second Temple. That instead, first of all, the very place of Jerusalem was mystified, imagined as something above. It often was used as a kind of symbolic way of referring to a messianic era or even the afterlife. So Herzl thinks that basically one of the big problems in contemporary Europe is that that Jews have been finally emancipated, but he articulates this idea that they've worked in finance both before and after emancipation. And his argument is that other jobs weren't available to Jews, and so they became involved in finance. And this just by coincidence of history happened to serve them well as Europe shifted into capitalism. It's not really true that all Jews were involved in finance, that not all people who were charging interest on loans were Jews, and certainly not all Jews were participating in that kind of occupation. But it was something they were really known for. And so Herzl does something kind of creative in responding to it by saying Jews were forced into that position by Europeans. There's no reason why they should be mistreated for it. But he says basically they can take everything they know from Europe with them to a Jewish state. So for him, it's essential that it become a Jewish state, but it's not essential for him that it be Palestine, right? He talks in this particular piece that he wrote for a London newspaper, a London Jewish newspaper, that he says it can really be anywhere. And that speaks to what he thought the Jewish nation should be. It really didn't need to be about historical Palestine, the land of Israel, anything like that. He thought that if Jews had a territory anywhere, that would be enough. So he mentions Argentina. There were other considerations, especially in Uganda, that basically he was willing to look anywhere and just get a contract for land. That if a country had a sparsely populated area, he thought that basically Jews could make a political deal, possibly buy the territory, buy out the people who are living there, and create a Jewish state there. Because all he thought that Jews needed was a place to live on their own, to run on their own, to make sure that they had rights, and to live away from the people who were persisting in anti-Semitism towards them.